Welcome back to the channel, guys. I've been fishing a jig for years. It's one of my favorite techniques to catch a lot of bass, especially largemouth bass up here in the Northeast. I fish it every single year. It catches me a ton of fish, catches some big fish. And over the years, I've learned some modification techniques to get some more fish on those tough days of fishing. So stay tuned, let's get right into it. We're gonna cut up a bunch of jigs here today and show you all the different modifications that I've done to my jigs over the years and when you should try to implement those modifications to your jig to catch more fish. So stay tuned, let's get right into it. So when you get a jig, you take the thing out of the package, you would think, let's just put this on the hook, tie it up, put a trailer on here, and go fishing. We'd be good to go. And a lot of jigs, they do come like that. You can fish them right out of the package and you will catch fish. But there's a couple things that I do to my jigs right out of the pack, every single one of them, to catch more fish. And then there's a couple modifications that I'll do on tougher days of fishing to account and catch even more fish that way. So when I get a jig, my favorite one is the 6th Sense hybrid jig. I've talked about it a few times. I will put a link to it down in the description below if you want to check it out. You'll also be able to use my code Quince. You'll save 10% off your order there and you'll be helping out the channel a ton. But when they come out of the package, the biggest thing, first thing you want to do with every jig is you check your weed guard. So when I push this weed guard down, it should end right at the front of the barb of the hook on here. So you can see when I push that weed guard down, that's actually going beyond the barb of the hook back into the bend. So when I set the hook on a fish, that's going to be pretty stiff and it's going to cause you to hook up less or get a weaker hookup. So what I'll do is I'll push it down and I got to cut literally a 1/16 of an inch off of this, but it makes a bigger difference than it sounds like. So I'll go ahead and I'll trim this guy up right on the table here. I'm just taking a pair of scissors and cutting it right along the edge there. I'm cutting it parallel or perpendicular with the weed guard. I'm cutting the whole thing back. So now you can see when I push that down, that touches the point of the hook there, the barb. So when I push that down, it clears much easier. So I can get a better hook set because it's just gonna clear when I set the hook. If you need to make a stiffer weed guard or a softer weed guard, you can then go ahead and adjust this. This I do not do to every jig. I do that to every jig. I'll check it, make sure the weed guard's good and trim it. This I don't do to every jig. It just depends on what I'm fishing. If I'm fishing really heavy cover and I need that jig to like hold up and not get hung up, I'll pull some of these front ones forward and cut these back ones off down at the base down here so that they're stiffer and they'll actually act as like a backboard to keep that from bending over as easily. And then you could do the complete opposite, is you could hold the back ones back and bend the front ones forward and cut these off, and you're actually taking strands out of the weed guard, and since it's from the front, it's going to make it a softer weed guard and bend over. So that's something that you can do. I don't do that on every jig, but that is a modification that you can do to your jig every single time if you need a softer or stiffer weed guard. Now, the other thing that I'll do to every jig, this will depend on the trailer that you're using. I pair these up with the bongo trailer pretty much 9 times out of 10, but if you like a different jig or like a different trailer, it may vary based on what you're using. I'll match this up with my bait. And you can see right there, when I match this up where it's supposed to sit on the bait, I don't take the skirt collar off that holds it all together yet until I'm ready here. But you can see when I hold that together, that skirt ends right when the claws begin. So this jig does not need any modification. But say it was hanging like this on that jig, where that skirt is interfering with your claws down into here. If that's happening, you gotta trim your skirt up a little bit more. So then I would take a pair of scissors and I would go ahead and trim the skirt however much I needed. Like if I wanted it right there, take like another 1/16 of an inch off. This is why I leave the little skirt holder together. I can go ahead, I can just line it up, get my 1/16 of an inch, and go ahead and just trim it right at the base there. And then now I have a trimmed up skirt that will interfere less. I know I didn't have to do that, but you can see that interferes less now when I put that trailer on there. It doesn't interfere with the claws at all. So those are the first 2 things I do with every jig when I take it out of the pack. I open the pack, I check the weed guard, I check the skirt, and then I'll be good to rig it up. So now I can go ahead and take this guy off and fluff my skirt up so that it's ready to fish. They come packed down like this, which is nice. They store better in my box. And then you just take that off and just pull at these strands like this, and it'll fluff it all up. And then now it's all loose and ready to go. And it's all puffy. So there's a couple things that you can do from this point to change up the action and presentation of your jig to actually catch more fish. So this is gonna be my standard jig. That's what I'm gonna fish 9 times out of 10. I'm gonna do that, put my trailer on, and then I'm good to go. So I'll go ahead, rig my trailer up on this guy like I would. I'll stab him right down the center and come up around the jig here and pop the hook out. And now I have a jig that's ready to fish. It's crooked a little bit, but that jig is ready to fish. I would actually go fish with that jig right there. 9 times out of 10, that's the way I'm gonna rig it up. So we'll set him right there. That's jig number 1. That's the way I like to fish it the most. Jig number 2 is going to be if you need a finesse cut skirt and you're really imitating crawfish. I fish these as football jigs a lot, so if you're dragging it on the bottom and trying to mimic crawfish and want a little finesse cut skirt to it, this is a modification I don't do as much, but what I'll do is I'll go ahead and at the skirt band here, I'll try and separate all the front skirt material. So I'll just start to slowly peel this apart from the front and leave all the skirt material behind the band. Let me get this sorted out here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. It takes a little bit of work, but if you can just kind of preen the silicone material either direction until you get it all separated, then just like that. See, it didn't take too much work there. So now you have your skirt band on the inside. This is all the material to the left of it, and this is all the material to the right. And when they trim it, they leave it tighter on the inside, and they leave it longer on the front. So this is actually gonna shorten your skirt as well as take some bulk out of it. And what I'll do is I'll hang that material off the front, and I'll just let it hang down. And as I let it hang down, I'll go ahead and pull it all together in my hand. To make sure it's all going to get cut properly. I'll pull it tight over the jig head, and then I'll take a pair of scissors and just go ahead and snip it right in front of the eye of the jig head. So now I just cut my skirt in half and gave it that little fuzzy look on the front. I know a lot of people like that look. They like the fuzz in the front, and I cut all that out of my jig head there. To make it a little bit shorter. So this just became a finesse jig essentially. This would be a perfect finesse flipping jig. It has less material. You could use a smaller trailer. It has that little fuzzy cut in the front to disguise the head a little bit. It's a great way to modify your jig and give it a little bit more finesse presentation. That's a very good way to trim your jigs up and catch some fish that way. But that's not one that I do very often. I'd rather just fish the full-size jig. You're gonna catch fish on it. However, I will do that same exact thing. This is one that I do a ton, mostly on my swim jigs, but I've done it on my flipping jigs as well too. This is one that I've done for a very, very long time. I don't know that I've seen too many people do it, but it's something that I've done as in basically creating a finesse profile without not ruining your jig, but making it look too strange. It's still going to look like a regular jig and fish like a regular jig, but be half the size. So you'll get more bites just by doing this right here. So again, we're gonna preen all the silicone to the separate sides. Takes a little bit of work. So I'm gonna pull all the ones up to the front again. And now I have all the ones in the back. And the longer ones are in the front. So it's gonna create that full profile. This is what creates the bulk on the inside. So I'm gonna take my pair of scissors. I love doing this on swim jigs down in Florida, stuff like that. It takes a couple little shots to trim this up like this, but I'm gonna go ahead and just cut it as close as I can before I trim this here. I'm gonna cut it as close as I can to the inside of the silicone band in here. So let's trim that up and show you what that looks like. So I'm gonna go ahead and do some snipping around the edge here, getting it all trimmed up. And it, like I said, it takes a couple cuts around the inside to get it where you need it. But when you're done, you're gonna have nothing on the inside there. You can see how tight that is. It opens up your hook keeper and you're good to go. When I flip this over, now I have a jig that looks like the jig you just took out of the pack. Doesn't look any different, but it has half the silicone skirt in there and it still flows like a regular jig. But when you put a trailer on here, it's gonna look like a much more finesse profile of the same jig. So I'm gonna take this trailer right here. I'm gonna go ahead and put that on like I would for the first jig. And now when this flops over, it still looks like a flipping jig, but it has less material. So side by side here, you can see how much different those two jigs look. You're gonna get more bites sometimes when you cut that in or out, and it just makes it flow better in the water. That is something I will do on the fly. I'll do it pretty often. It's a technique that I've used over the years to catch a bunch of fish. And it's one of my favorite ways to modify a jig. Honestly, it probably is my favorite cut to modify a jig by doing that right there. It's just a great way to do it. It works excellent on swim jigs. You can do it on football jigs to make them more finesse. You can do it on a flipping jig where like this spider cut, that's something I usually only do for a finesse jig. You can do it for a flipping jig and create like a finesse flipping jig or a football jig, but that's not something I do a whole lot. The inside cut, you can do to any jig and it does not affect the performance of it or anything or the look. It doesn't change that too much. So that's one cut that I do all the time. I don't do it to every jig. It depends on what I want. If I want a big bite, I'm gonna leave all that skirt in there. If I feel like the fish are a little finicky and I need it a little bit lighter inside there, I'll trim it up a little bit more. Or if the fish are smaller, if I'm fishing a place that only has 1 and 2 pound bass, I'll trim that inside out and it makes it look easier for them to get it into their mouth because there's less bulk. So that's some stuff that you can do to your jig. If you want to see a video on that jig and learn how to fish it, check this video out right here. Hit that subscribe button down below if you enjoyed today's video, and thanks for watching.